In the last lecture, we looked at the realization that all of Gabriel Syme's experiences, at least certainly between the time that he was in the garden and he finds himself walking on the road with Gregory at the end of the novel, were a dream. And so the fact that that was a dream, I said, gives us the sense that we need to reinterpret the narrative in light of some more symbolic or metaphorical sense. And so one of the things that I encouraged you as readers to pay attention to was the colors in this book. And particularly, you'll notice that the color red is prominent all throughout this book. And so I want to quickly run through just a list of red or related colors that pop up throughout the story, and then see if we can make some sense of that. So page 1, red with respect to the suburb. Sunset, he talks about that cloud of sunset. Bright brick, which has red connotations to it. The houses were red. Auburn is the hair of the poet Gregory. Page 2, again, Gregory's hair is described as auburn. The red-haired poet Gregory. Gregory's hair is called red again on page 2. On page 3, we have the sunset, the red-hot plumes of the sky. He calls colors cruel in reference to some of the reds that he's seeing. Again, on page 3, the hair of Gregory. On page 4, Rosamund, Gregory's sister's hair. Blazing light on page 4 with respect to the bomb. Gregory's head on page 5 is called red again. The patch on Gregory's forehead turns red on page 5. On page 6, he talks about the red mane. On page 7, a girl's red hair, the red thread throughout the story. Page 8, fiery hair. Page 13, red subterranean light, red light, crimson lantern. Page 15, blood and wine. 16, blood, bloody Sunday. Page 17, red hot pincers. Page 22, with respect to Gregory again, red hair and scarlet. We have a kind of face on page 26 related to the red color, the blood in the face. Page 31, bleeding faces and dark red sunset, red ruler and red sky reflecting his anger, fiercer flame and sunset, all of those on page 31, as well as a stream of literal fire. Page 32, bloody red sun, the human blood, bloody the river there. Page 37, crimson light, sunset, disastrous twilight. Page 28, sun in eclipse and the unnatural discoloration there. Red flower on page 39. Page 41, early sunlight, sunlit leaves, sunlight. Page 45, red mouth, crimson lips. Page 48, sunlit trees. Page 49, sunny square. Page 56, Gogol's hair and red-haired detective. 58 is red wine. 60, red lion court. 70 and 75, burgundy. 79, red. Red day, red cloud, heavy red. Page 82, red up to elbow. And passionate red hair, also on 82. 90 and 91, red rosette. Aunt's hair on page 91. Blood on 95 twice. And on page 96, bloodless on 96. Bloody on 96. Red hair, 97. Page 98, crimson with rage. The color of the sunset on 112. The red face on 124. Red hair on 128. Sunset on 138. And the colored like a sunset cloud on 138. Reddened and rosier on 142. Setting sun on 143. Red sky on 145. Sunset cloud and light of sunset and blood on 146. Burgundy twice on 147 and once on 148. Red on 151. Red hair on 154 3 times. Red flames on 154. Red haired on 156. Rose on 156. Red buildings on 156. And the gold red hair on 156. And so those are not a comprehensive list, but merely more than 50 occurrences of red or red-like colors throughout the story. And so in some of those things that you heard, it talks about the red reflecting certain characteristics. And so one of the more prominent places where that happens is in chapter 4, The Tale of a Detective, on page 31. And chapter 4 is interesting because we get a flashback now to Syme. And it says, he walked on the embankment once under a dark red sunset. The red river reflected the red sky, and they both reflected his anger. The sky indeed was so swarthy, and the light on the river relatively so lurid, that the water almost seemed of fiercer flame than the sunset it mirrored. It looked like a stream of literal fire winding under the vast caverns of a subterranean country. And so in that paragraph alone, we've got, the sunset and the river, the sky, the fierce flame, the sunset, the literal fire, all of these red-like color imagery. And here we explicitly get the idea that red reflected his anger. Now, red is used of a number of characters. Certainly, Gregory and Rosamund are probably the most closely associated with red. Of course, Rosamund's name itself has rose in it and links us with red. But Gregory and Rosamund form a really interesting contrast, because as brother and sister, we would expect some similarities, and the red hair is a similarity, but they have radically different personalities, radically different roles within the story. Of course, Gregory serves as this strange antagonist at the beginning that is really Syme's counterpart as this poet, this anarchist poet that Syme has to defeat. And then, of course, Gregory re-enters at the end as the embodiment of Satan. And so this wrestling with the character of Gregory, the red seems to be related to his own anger, his frustration and accusation against what he says the princes of heaven that never come down from their thrones. And so Gregory and his association with red seems to be very much in terms of anger, hatred, the kinds of things we might associate with that passion in a negative sense of red. On the other hand, Rosamund has an innocence to her, a kindliness, a beauty to her. And so as her hair is described as red, we get a very different picture. We could certainly understand the red being passionate. We could see Syme's attraction to her and his interest in her, the way that her red hair serves as this thread that ties all of the succeeding narratives together. And so even later in the novel, when he's talking with the professor, he says something to the effect of as passionate as a woman's red hair. And so we get the sense that red also equals passion. And so that passion has the possibility to lead to anger, accusation, diablerie, devilry, satanic influence, if you will, with Gregory. And then a very different way with Rosamund, that red reflects a more pure and innocent passion. We see her at the end of the novel with her gold rose red hair, saying the unconscious gravity of a girl. There's a youthful innocence to Rosamund, a beauty and a passion that go with that red that are an important contrast to Gregory. And so I think there's a place to really struggle throughout the novel to see perhaps the symbolic meaning of red, and to recognize red in some ways as passion, but that passion can take on negative or positive characteristics based on whether it's the innocence or the anger that takes precedent in those characters. And so we see Syme early on, the red sky and the red river reflected his anger. But Syme himself responds then to that passion in an appropriate way, and he applies that passion towards doing the right thing, whereas Gregory takes that passion and he applies it towards the wrong thing. And so that by no means exhausts the meaning of the color red, but I think it gives us something to be thinking about in terms of the symbolic meaning of red, and perhaps how that fits into the overall context of the meaning of the novel. And there's one more point that I want us to consider here, and it relates to the previous lecture and this one about the dream and the symbolism of red. And I think that dream and red imagery that dominate throughout the novel are both linked. So consider this. As sunset draws into night, at the beginning of the novel, especially on page 7, and I think the dream begins, or at least we can understand in some ways the dream beginning on page 7. As the sunset draws into night and the dream begins, the color red helps link the dream together like that red thread through the story. And at the end of the novel, when he talks about the good news in waking, it's actually marked by a sunrise, the sunlight of a sunrise. And so the beginning of the dream is marked by this strange sunset that leads into the darkness of the dream, the nightmare, the struggles that they experience. But after he comes to the realization of what Sunday means and what they all mean, and we'll talk about that in another lecture, he wakes up with what he says is some impossibly good news, and that good news is marked not by a sunset, but by a sunrise. And so I think the dream and the red imagery, as it's linked also with the sunset and the sunrise, play a significant role throughout the novel. And so I wanted to make sure we saw how those two things, the dream and the color red, are linked together throughout the novel. And then I think there's a great place to begin exploring some of those other colors that we see throughout the novel and see if there's perhaps some kind of symbolic meaning to those as well.